I don't know if everybody knows what EDIS is, but the abbreviation is Educational and Developmental Intervention and Services. A lot of jargon to say we have a team who works with early intervention, the children 3 and under. If there's like speech delays or speech concerns, that's the most common one that kind of gets like referred to us from the CDC. And then we also have a school-age children team, which is 3 and up. And that's the field that I work in. I work at the schools, from like PSCD, the special needs preschool at LES, all the way up through, we would see middle schoolers and high schoolers, although we tend to have more of the littles here on the base than we do the older kids. But so we have speech therapists, we have psychologists, we have occupational therapists, physical therapists, and I'm with occupational therapy, which is usually the one that people know the least what it means out of the professions that I just listed. But a lot of what we look at is fine motor development and just kind of child development in general, and then also like sensory processing are kind of the 2 branches of what occupational therapy specifically looks at. So that's kind of the area that I'm coming from in the expertise that I talk about. But I wanted to start by asking everybody to think about what comes to your mind when you hear the word learning. You can shout something out if you have any good. First thing that pops into your mind, if this was a word association game. Teaching. That's a good one.
Reading.
School, reading. Yeah, lots of things like that. You can go to the next slide. I typed learning into a stock photo website. I got, this looks like us in this room. A bunch of people sitting around listening to a lecture. You can click to the next one. I got blackboards and chairs and tables. You can click to the next one. I like this one a lot. This guy is sitting barefoot in a field in a chair with books flying around his head. So I'm not fully sure if that's what I think of when I think of learning. But lots of reading, teaching, kind of structured, being lectured to, watching a PowerPoint, things like that. Now I want you to think about playing. What comes to your mind when you think of playing? Fun. What was that? Toys. Learning. Hey, you're getting ahead of me. You can click through to the next one. I typed playing in. I got lots of blocks, lots of children stacking blocks. You can click to the next one. I got children playing in a sand pit, playing on the playground, playing with toys, things like that. Climbing up playground structures. Lots of like outdoor activity play. I think that a lot of times the first thing that pops into our head with playing is something that's very like stock photo, like children spinning on a merry-go-round and laughing together or stacking blocks. And the cool thing that you already noticed is that when we're talking about children, especially from birth through 7 years old, but even on up through the rest of the childhood and the rest of the lifespan, scientists who study brains and learning actually agree that learning and play are extremely closely linked, not 2 separate things at all. The most powerful way for children to learn is actually to play. You can click to the next one. This quote I pulled from a study that was done in 2021 that said, in summary, meta-analyses identified significant evidence for play having a greater positive effect than direct instruction on math skills, shape knowledge, task switching, spatial vocabulary. So they measured it on all of these different subtests where they were testing what the kids already knew before they went into the study and then knew after the study. And the kids who just played with toys and with activities that targeted those things learned more by the end than the children who were like being taught it by an adult trying to like impart them knowledge verbally. And so too often adults will get in the way of children playing because they may believe that the other things that they're doing are more important. It could be parents or teachers or caregivers or grandparents or babysitters. So I'm not saying this like to you guys, but like as knowledge you can have when going to parents as well. In my experience, almost every one of these adults has good motives. They're very well-meaning about it. They're not like, I hate it when kids have fun and I think I'll stop them. Like, that's not anybody's motive. They see play as something extra for kids to do when there's nothing else better to do. But they want their child to have a rich and meaningful life, so they might spend a lot of time or effort or money to try to make sure that their child has something better to do than just freely playing. Or they might have something that feels very important to them, so then they try to spend the child's time teaching the child that thing that's very important to them without realizing that they might be getting in the way on accident of the child learning that thing through play. You can click to the next one. This starts in the baby years, and it continues all the way up. Babies practice reaching out for things and grasping them, rolling themselves over, sitting themselves up, getting from one position to another even when it's frustrating. These types of play is the earliest type of play that we see in like human development is called locomotor play. So just play where you are moving for the sake of moving. Because before a baby is even really interested in playing or interacting with toys, the very, very earliest thing that they're doing is like, oh my gosh. Oh, how did that happen? I want to make that happen again. And they're just moving for the sake of moving. The moving is the like entertainment and the learning, both together in one. Rolling over just because it's really cool to face this way now. Learning to scoot around or crawl because it's amazing to move your hands and knees at the same time. And just like all types of play, locomotor play, whether with babies or with older kids, can involve struggle and even frustration. And it's really hard and awkward for an adult to watch, or for anyone to watch somebody else struggle with something and not naturally want to be like, let me just step in and like help you or do it for you. But even when that struggle is important, like it's important for them to go through that as long as they're not in distress about it. So a lot of adults will kind of try to swoop in to save the child from that frustration. But letting babies try to learn that as long as they're not in distress yet. It's okay to be frustrated as a part of play. A lot of times when we think of play, we think of it as being equivalent with fun. But with babies or with older children, a lot of times play involves frustration. Like that might be in social things, like you're trying to work something out with another person. That might be as something as young as this, like you're trying to roll over, but you haven't quite got it yet. You've got to keep working on those muscles. So we see locomotor play as one of the earliest types of play, and then it continues on through the lifespan. The way I have these slides labeled talks about when that kind of play kind of starts being evident, but once it starts being evident, it might be something that continues their whole life. Even adults can do locomotor play, like being interested in doing activities or sports for the sake of doing them and not because they like need to win or beat somebody else at it. You can click to the next one. So toddlers also do locomotor play, and then I don't have a slide for it for every single age, but it does look a lot different in toddlers because they'll be able to like climb up a ladder or climb up a chair or stand on the table where they're not supposed to be. A lot of times toddlers will have the same thing happen. They get frustrated when they can't climb up a ladder on the playground or they can't jump high enough to reach something. And so the adults might lift them up or hold them up to it. Or they might try to give the child verbal instructions about how to do it. And at the toddler age, this really tends to go over their head. They really learn best by trying it out with their own body and figuring out how it feels by playing. Because making a motor plan is something that happens when you see somebody else do something that you've never done before. And then your own brain is like, okay, I can guess about which muscles I would activate in order to make my body do the thing I just saw their body do. And toddlers are like learning the motor planning stage, which is why if you like show them a dance move or something, then they'll like try to copy you, but it's like not perfect because they're figuring out how to make their body move the way that your body is moving. It would be an even higher tier of developmental like ability to make a motor plan based on just something somebody is telling you and not something that you are seeing with your eyes. And so that is too high for most toddlers, especially early toddlers. As they get closer to like 3 and 4, then sometimes you can explain like, oh, you open that bottle by twisting the top, and they know what all of those words mean, so they can like try it even though they haven't seen you do it. But in the earliest stages, it doesn't mean anything to them when you're talking to them about it. They just need to try it, or they need to see you do it, or both. And gaining these body skills through struggling and trying and failing and trial and error instead of taking shortcuts is extremely important because it's actually the foundation of writing skills, which I'm going to talk about more in a little bit. But I wanted to touch on some of the other forms of play too, because locomotor play isn't the only kind of play that people engage in. Toddlers will get into exploratory play, which is when you play with the physics of objects, throw things, bang things, drop things, just literally seeing how objects interact with other objects. And adults might try to put a stop to that because Toddlers don't necessarily know the difference between what objects are a good idea for that kind of exploration and what objects are a bad idea for that kind of exploration. So to a toddler, there might be no difference between, I would like to explore what happens when I throw this block on the ground, and I would like to explore what happens when I throw this iPhone on the ground. And so, or they'll be sitting at their high chair at mealtime, and they're like, I would like to explore what happens when all of this food falls on the ground. The adult might be tempted to see that as like bad behavior instead of as a developmentally normal play phase. That doesn't mean that the adult can't stop it or shouldn't stop it or shouldn't teach them, but it does mean that the adult can keep in their mind that the child is not just, this goes back to what the previous trainer was just talking about the stories that we tell ourselves about what other people's actions mean. When we tell ourselves that our child, they know the rule and they're just not following it, versus being like, oh, well, it's their job to explore how things fly through the air, and that's annoying, and I need to like help stop them, but I don't have to like be angry at them about it. It's much more successful to give them loads and loads of access to things that they are perfectly welcome to throw and bang and drop, as opposed to just trying to stop them from every single one. You can go to the next one. Toddlers do a lot of closely examining objects, object interactions, taking apart objects. They might not be using the objects for the purpose that the adult would look at the object and think that it is for, which is why I have a picture of a child's hands holding like 40 crayons, and they might do something like hold 40 crayons and just walk around with 40 crayons in their hands, and the adult sees that as like, could be potential danger, maybe they're going to carry it over there and draw on the wall, could be just like not sharing, the other kid doesn't have any crayons to play with and they want to use it the right way, could be just like, oh, well, I need to intervene because that's not what crayons are for. But as long as it's not an actual imminent danger situation, and like I need to keep an eye on that because they might go draw on the wall, then I try to let kids use objects for things that are not the thing that the object is intended for. As long as it's not going to break the object, it's not going to hurt the child or hurt somebody else. They might find some small random thing that isn't even a toy and become fascinated with it. They might try to take things apart to see what's inside them, or put things together in unique and creative ways. And all of it seems really basic to adults, but that's because when we were toddlers, we did all that kind of play. We carried around random things that nobody needed to really be holding 40 of, and we threw stuff on the floor to see what it would sound like. And they're laying the foundations for being able to come up with creative problem-solving skills later in life, and understanding all kinds of foundations of things later in life. And then you can go to the next one. As we get into the preschool years, and there's a lot of overlap between toddler and preschool years, so these aren't like hard and fast rules. But there are even more types of play that start happening. Children really go through an explosion of types of play that they can access in the like 3 to 5 age range. Preschoolers do a lot of rough-and-tumble play, like wrestling, pretending to hit or fight, but not actually intending to hit or fight, things like that. And in a lot of contexts, especially the context that we all work in, school or daycare, that might not be allowed for children to engage in this kind of play. And there are good reasons for that, as long as all the adults keep in mind that, again, just like with toddlers and throwing stuff that they're not supposed to, it is developmentally normal for children to want to or try to engage in this kind of play because they're just following their body's normal development. And so being mad at them or punishing them for like keeping gravitating back towards something that their brain is telling them is natural and necessary, we definitely don't want to teach them that they'll be punished for like listening to their body's needs. We might still need to stop them, like as a, hey, I am being your impulse control right now. I am being your underdeveloped nervous system. I'm stopping you from doing the thing that I know isn't safe in this context. But we want them to understand that they can trust their adults to hear what is a need for them and acknowledge like what's going on for them, even if the adult has to stop them from doing something that seems like it might be fun. Because we also want them to know that they can trust the adults to keep everybody safe. And there's also always the kids who really, really don't like rough and tumble play. And so they would feel like, I was at daycare and somebody attacked me, and the other kid was just trying to play. You can go to the next one. Role play and socio-dramatic play are two kinds of play that are describe children acting out things that they've seen in real life. This is how they make sense of the world around them. Pretending to act like moms and dads, pretending to act like teachers, doctors, people who can drive cars, people who can work at shops, people who give haircuts. Their brains are asking and sorting out all kinds of questions like, what is the nature of this activity? What do grown-ups get from engaging in this activity? What's important about it? If I take something out and put something else in, is it still the same thing? How are other people involved? Why does society work the way it does? And they're like all these really big, philosophical questions that they wouldn't necessarily have the words to tell you that that's what they're thinking about. But that's the pieces that their brains are putting together, and that lays the foundations for more complicated, discussions and thought processes that happen later on. You can click to the next one. Really closely related to that is a lot of imaginative play and fantasy play with make-believe elements and saying things that aren't really real. So this is different from the last one in that this is where it's like, I'm pretending to be a superhero or a princess, or things that they haven't necessarily seen in real life, but the child doesn't necessarily distinguish between these two types of play. They might have fantasy elements in their imaginative play, and they might have imaginative elements in their fantasy play, like we're all princesses and we're going to get a haircut, and then we're going to the BX for some drinks from Starbucks. That's right? Like, I'd be down for that. Children at this age are still exploring the difference between what is real and what is fantasy. And one way that I see this come out a lot is that they believe what they're talking about. They're sorting out the values of, like, honesty versus happiness and delight. Like, if you ask them a question and the honest answer is going to make you sad, they might think it's kinder to tell you the answer that will make you happy, because most preschoolers would rather hear answers to things that will make them happy, and most preschoolers aren't super concerned with answers that are true. So they're not necessarily like trying to be deceptive, but their line between what is real, what is not real, is still something that they're exploring really extensively through play like this. You can click to the next one. One type of play that goes really across the lifespan is creative play. Toddlers, preschoolers, elementary age kids will all do creative play, but it often looks very different across the age span. Toddlers and preschoolers are usually more interested in process art, which is using creative materials for the sake of exploring what the creative materials will do. And older children are often more interested in product art, which is where they start the art process with a finished product in their mind, and they're working toward a goal, an end goal of making something that looks like what it is that they pictured. Both of these are really important, and having the appropriate one for the right age is really important. And when I go to talking about the foundations of writing, then I'm going to come back and touch on this again in a minute. You can click to the next one. Older kids and adults start really having communicative play, social play. Younger kids, younger elementary, and even preschoolers might try this, but it's just like a very, very unsophisticated form of it. So whereas my husband and I have like all kinds of like inside jokes, and like we'll say one thing and it like has a double meaning that somebody else listening to the conversation wouldn't know. My children are 3 and 5. My 3-year-old's idea of like doing a joke is to just like say poop instead of a different word in a sentence. So like she's got the very, very kind of earliest foundation of what it means to have a type of play that has nothing to do with objects, is only like verbal and with another person. She gets the humor and the delight and the like playfulness that comes from that, but like her expression of it is just like really, really immature because she's 3 and it's supposed to be. So communicative play and social play involve playing with words, making jokes, lots of verbal things. They might also spill into communicating to complete a shared goal, like figuring out the rules of a game together. You might be making it up. It might make no sense to anybody who's not helping you make it up. Or verbally planning about what it is that you want to build out of building materials. Again, this goes on into adulthood. I like playing board games and party games that involve us all just like literally sitting around talking, but we've got like, oh, this card is in the middle, and then everybody puts a card that has to do with it, and then we decide which one is funniest. And that's just a very social play, communicative play game. It isn't interesting in and of itself. It's not the fun coming from laying down cards next to another card. The fun is coming from the shared meaning. So you can see there are so many forms of play that happen across the span of childhood. They take many, many different shapes, and they're incredibly important. And each form of them is the child's brain learning something foundational that it needs to know to build up into higher skills, like learning in an academic context, being able to draw conclusions from data, being able to solve problems, working together, understanding yourself and what needs you're having, understanding someone else and what needs they might be having. And all of these things spring up from children having like literally thousands of hours of access to playing before they start having like more rigorous demands of school and of other things that just kind of come up in life as you get older. You can click to the next one for me. So I talked about how locomotor play is the earliest form of play that babies explore, and then it goes on through the lifespan. And I talked about how difficult it can be for adults to not try to step in and make it easier for them. There are some really important reasons to try to let children explore their body's movement at their own pace. Can you click to the next one for me? That's because all humans' bodies develop strength from the core first, then working outward. Muscle strength, joint stability are two of the major ones. So I had these things on here as my like important preschool, not preschool like they must be done in preschool because they could be done at home or done wherever, but skills that need to be in place before school is like possible. Or it will be a struggle, and then you might get referred to EDIS. Core strengthening, joint stabilizing, drawing prewriting shapes, bilateral coordination, and using tools and school materials. And I know that has a lot of jargon in it, and I'm going to define each one of those when I get to them. But if you can click to the next one for me. Human bodies develop from the core outward, or from the inside out. So I have this picture of this child, because they are really super well demonstrating for me. The first area that develops are the core muscles and the muscles that control your trunk. And then it progresses outward. And it's the same for the joints. So it's starting in the core and then kind of the shoulders and upper arms at the same time as like the hips and upper legs, and then the elbows and the knees, and then the forearms and the lower legs and feet and the hands. Like it's going outward and outward. So you can click to the next one for me. Children need lots and lots of strength in their core to be able to do things like be able to sit up without leaning on something. That's like a skill that we see start developing in like 6-ish month olds, but it's also true for 6-year-olds and 60-year-olds. Many kids don't get the chance to develop enough core strength. They tend to be very floppy. They might like lean or drape. You might be sitting in a way where you're like leaning a lot of your weight on like the table or the chair right now, sitting here listening to me, because it's very hard to like hold yourself up with your core for just like hours and hours. And if children's core is not strong enough to hold them up for an extended period of time, core strength is important for baby milestones like rolling over, sitting up, crawling, walking. It's also important for older children. You can't do monkey bars or a cartwheel without core strength. You can't walk steadily in the hallway without leaning on things or leaning on the wall without core strength. You can't sit upright and sit still without core strength. It's really the heart of almost everything that humans do in a day, and tons of things that children have to do at school. And it develops naturally through play if children are given the chance to play for enough hours before things start kind of becoming expected of them. Like sitting still. Or walking calmly in the hallway. If they have enough time to put themselves into weird positions and crawl into tight spaces and climb things and flip upside down and right side up again and roll around and jump around and run around, their cores get stronger and stronger. So it's both a blessing and a curse that it's the heart of so many things that we do in a day, because it means that it's very easy to give a child enough access to core strengthening activities if they can kind of just like run around and be a goober. But if there are a lot of other demands in place, or if there is something that's causing them like a medical disability or something like that, then it really like piles on, because it's hard to do the foundational thing, so then it's hard to do the next thing, so then it's hard to do the next thing, and so the delay can kind of like pile up and pile up. I mentioned how joints also develop from inward to outward: shoulders, then elbows, then wrists, then fingers, hips, then knees, then ankles, then toes. The shoulders need to be strong and stable before the elbows, before the wrists, before the fingers, because that's how like babies learn to like reach for and pick up objects. First, they'll learn how to basically like fling their entire arm in the direction of the thing that they want and maybe touch it or slap it. And then they'll learn to like slowly refine that movement until they can reach for something. And then the first thing they learn to do is like grab it with their whole hand, opening and closing. And then over time they learn to like pinch at it with like just their fingers, or even like pinch it and then like hold it in their other hand and be able to like pick pieces out of it or take it apart or twist it open or things like that. They're still learning that from baby into toddler years. Oh, thank you for So, yeah, go ahead and click to the next one. 3 and 4-year-olds need to be doing tons of work to strengthen and stabilize the bigger joints that are closer into the core before they get to school and are working on the smaller, further out joints. And that work is just their play. They need to carry things, push things, pull things, pour, scoop, pinch and twist and dig and hammer and smash and break and rip and pick at and build and squeeze a zillion things before all those muscles have developed the kind of coordination that it takes to do incredibly precise tasks like write letters or button small buttons or cut with scissors. When I named this talk, I called it Protecting the Power of Play, because this is something that needs to be protected. Because, like, society-wide, like, all of America and a lot of the UK, like, culture-wide, it is really under attack. And again, it's not an attack on purpose. It's not because adults are just mean and don't like children. It's the exact opposite. It's with pure intentions. Adults want to do what's best for children. And so an adult might think about what kind of demands or expectations there are going to be for a child in kindergarten or in first grade. And so they think that they'll try to make the world a little bit easier for the child by trying to start teaching them things ahead of time. But the problem is that their bodies are just physically not ready for it yet. Children can't learn what they're not ready for. And then on the flip side, when they are ready for it, they'll often become super fascinated and like passionate about it until they've completely figured it out. You can click to the next one. Okay, I'll come back to that in a sec. I noticed this happen in my own life with my son. I have a 5 and a 3-year-old, and my son was my first child, and I wasn't finished with school yet when he was born, so I really didn't know everything about child development that I had like now learned and studied over time. He's a really tall and big kid. Like, he's always at the top of the growth percentiles. And when he was somewhere between like 18 months old, 2 years old, somewhere in that range, I started becoming super frustrated that he would not climb into his own car seat, which sounds like silly to my own ears for me to even say that now. But to me, he looked visibly big and tall enough, and he could climb up on the couch, and he could climb up on the play equipment at the playground. And so I felt like he was just purposely not climbing into his car seat when I told him to do it. And he was really heavy, and I was tired, and I was sometimes carrying stuff to the car or groceries or whatever, and I didn't want to pick him up into his car seat every time. And then COVID hit when he was about 2.5, and just like per our personal experience, we really sheltered from the world for a really long time. He rode in a car, almost none whatsoever, for about 1.5 years straight. We went like a few places, but for the most part, one parent or the other could stay home, and so the kids, we just kind of like needed for them to be able to stay home. And so I could probably count on one hand the number of times he rode in a car for about 1.5 years straight. And then when the restrictions started to relax and we started going places again, I opened the car door and he just climbed into the car seat. Like, he hadn't practiced in 1.5 years. I hadn't told him to. I had forgotten all about this. Like, this wasn't the biggest important thing in my life anymore. I had just been doing COVID for 1.5 years, so like this was not relevant to me. It didn't even hit me until he just did it. I had always thought that the way that you teach kids to do things is like you have to like make them do it over and over and over again. And so it was very startling to me to see me have not even mentioned something or something have even been relevant to our lives for such a long time. And then when his body was ready, then he just did it. It wasn't like a thing. We didn't have to make it a thing. I've seen that happen with my own children. I've seen that happen with the children that I work with as an OT, like dozens or hundreds of times. Their adults might believe that they're ready to do something independently, or that they should be able to, or that they're big enough to, or they're old enough to, or that their peers can do it right now. And the adults might be sure that it's just like bad behavior or a bad attitude, or that they're not motivated enough to do it. But then as soon as the child actually becomes able, then they do it, because kids want to be independent. Of course, there are times when something else feels more important to them, like they want to feel taken care of. So I don't mean that 100% of the time children do things independently. The same way that when I'm laying down on the couch and my husband's laying next to me, I might be like, you want to get up and get me a drink? And he'll do it because he loves me and I want to feel cared for, even though we're both physically capable of getting off the couch and getting a drink. But trying to stand over a child and like insist that they do something that they're not ready for, like a 3 or 4 year old write or trace letters because we think it'll make kindergarten easier for them eventually is like trying to prop a 2-month-old baby up on their feet so that they'll learn to walk earlier, because we know it's going to be hard for them to walk eventually and we want to make them ready in advance. It doesn't work. Their body isn't ready for it yet, and no amount of practicing will make their body do a better job when it is ready for it. And it might even hurt them in the meantime. I liked this. It's just like a meme that I found and I saved. It's labeled Prewriting Skills in Action, and it has 3 boys who are just in the backyard and they're just like digging dirt with shovels. There's no pens or paper to be seen. And it says at the bottom, building strong core strength builds a strong foundation for your child's gross motor and fine motor skills, which is super duper true. Having the core strength, having the hand strength to grip those shovels, to push all the muscles that it takes to push, scoop, lift, hold, keep gripping, twisting, squeezing, all of that stuff is what makes them able to write once they are ready to write. You can click to the next one. So I've got my extremely sophisticated drawing examples that I was drawing at my desk, and my coworker who was like actively working on like scoring a standardized assessment walks by, and I've got crayons and I'm scribbling on a piece of paper. But I wanted to show you what writing development looks like in toddlers and preschoolers. Toddlers and preschoolers might be very interested in mark-making tools like pencils, crayons, and markers, or they might have no interest at all. There isn't one set age where children are interested in drawing and coloring. But almost all of them will go through a phase at some age where they're interested in it, unless adults in their life have made it into like a really demanded or really like threatening activity. Sometime between usually 18 months old and usually 4 years old, somewhere in that range, most children will go through a phase where they realize that objects can make marks on things. If they're like my daughter, they might be way more interested in making marks on their skin than on the paper. Or the walls. And so this is how that usually develops. The first thing that we usually see is either like random scribbles or long random lines that are kind of like depending on how big of a paper they have access to, or walls. The next thing that usually develops is more focused scribbles. By focused scribbles, I mean like we've got like vertical line scribbling, horizontal line scribbling, or scribbling in circles. Because then when you click to the next one for me, the top row is the next thing that develops, which is vertical lines, horizontal lines, or circles. So the first thing that they're doing before that is like, I don't know how to stop, but I know how to start, sort of, and I'm kind of making the lines that are going to become important eventually. And then eventually they learn how to like inhibit at the end of the line. I've drawn it and then I stop, whoa, instead of going back and keeping going. Scribbles, though, are an actual important stage of development. So if a kid is at the scribble phase, we don't need to like explicitly teach them to stop or to just make a line. Letting kids scribble is not just letting them waste paper or stopping them from what they need to do later on. Just like letting them crawl isn't stopping them from learning to walk. It's the first step, and it's an important step in and of itself. If I gave you a coloring sheet, and it was like a kid's coloring sheet, so it had big swaths of paper, you would color it in by scribbling. It would be very neat scribbling. But that's how an adult colors in like a huge field of paper. You would probably do it in vertical, horizontal, or circular patterns, depending on what it is that you were filling in. That's exactly what this step is for. It teaches children how to start and stop, how to go in one direction and then come back and go in the other direction, and all of those things are super important. So then the next thing that they learn is horizontal, vertical, individual lines that are not attached to a scribble, and circles that are not attached to a scribble. These come from refining the skill of starting and stopping at the right time, because you have to start, stop when it's just one line and not a scribble. Then there's like this leap where there are these hugely important skills of drawing on the diagonal, crossing midline, and abruptly changing direction. All 3 of these are very challenging skills for a brain to develop. Drawing on the diagonal is really tricky. It requires your brain to figure out how to draw basically horizontally and vertically at the same time. If you ask a child who's too young to try to copy a diagonal line that you've already drawn, they'll usually make either a horizontal line or a vertical line, because their brain is like, I can see that this is supposed to go from like one way to the other way, but I can only do left or right, left to right, or top to bottom, but I can't do both at the same time. Crossing midline, like making a cross, crossing across the middle line, is also really tricky because it engages the left and the right sides of your brain. If you ask a child who's too young to try to copy a cross, they'll usually make a line, and then they'll start at the middle and go outward, and then they'll start at the middle again and go outward. And because their brain hasn't even recognized that you could go from, their brain's going, I've checked off the right side and I've checked off the left side. It's not seeing it as one thing that you could do, go from left to right and that be all in one thing. And go from left to right is a very important skill in reading, writing, interpreting a calendar, interpreting a clock, lots of things that are going to be skills later on. So it's something that kind of comes from this area of development. Changing direction, like to make a triangle or a square. No, triangle also has diagonals, so triangles are just so hard. Changing direction abruptly is tricky because it means your brain has to have already made the motor plan. I talked about this earlier when I talked about you doing a dance move and a kid trying to copy you doing a dance move. But kids will also make a motor plan in their own mind for what they're going to do. Like if they see something and they want to jump over it, they'll think their brain is taking in information that it's done before. I've jumped before. I've jumped over things that were similar height to this. I've jumped over things that were similar length. And then half the time they'll try to jump over it and their feet will catch on and they'll fall over because they haven't super refined how to make a motor plan yet. Changing direction is another example of how to make a motor plan. Your brain has to know that you're going to go this way and then you're going to stop and then you're going to go this way in order to make a square. Versus a circle where it's just kind of I just keep going and I'm finding out what's happening as this curve goes. You have to have more planning in your mind to make something with clearly defined edges. So if you ask a child who's too young to try to copy a square, they'll usually make something with rounded edges or just straight up a circle. Can you click to the next one for me? If children can't cross midline or can't draw diagonals or can't change direction, they are not capable of drawing letters. All of those skills must be in place before children can draw letters. These are some letters that have a diagonal line in them. Y, X, V, W, Z, N, K, A, Q, all of those have a diagonal line in them. That's just uppercase. You can click to the next one. These are letters that cross midline. A, M, N, T, H, X. There might be more. I wasn't being exhaustive. I was just thinking of some examples. And then many of them have abrupt changes in direction. You can click to the next one. B, N, M, P, L, E, W, X, V, F, Z, A. You have to stop what you're doing on one line and make an abrupt change in direction to make those. I get referred children for occupational therapy all the time who are in kindergarten or sometimes even in first grade who physically can't form letters. And whenever I do this testing with them, 100% of the time, that means that they're at an earlier stage. They can do line, circle, but they can't do diagonal. Or they might have one of these because all these skills aren't always at the same time. So they might have yes to cross midline, but no to diagonal or things like that. Which also means they might not be able to write their name correctly if their name has those letters in it and it is missing they're missing one or more of those skills. And so a lot of times we'll try to practice writing names with 3 and 4-year-olds because again we think this is a skill that they're going to need for their entire life. They're going to have to write their name 50 million times before they die. Why don't we just go ahead and start? But if they don't have the underlying skills, then they probably won't be able to do it. You can click to the next one. These are some examples of some names where I wrote these, but these are examples based on what I see in my practice of the child not being able to make a diagonal or not being able to cross midline. So on the top one, we've got Tyler. He's doing his best, but he can't make the diagonal lines on the Y, so there's just kind of some horizontal lines next to a vertical line, and the R is just doing its own thing. We've got Alex in the middle, does not know how to do a diagonal, so his X is a T, and same with Max on the bottom. And the diagonals in the A are really hard. He might be able to do a little bit sideways because he recognizes he might be able to see it with his eyes, but the eyes and the hands don't always develop at the same rate. So a child might be able to identify letters, and that's why I also like to recommend to people to do multimodal, different forms of reading and writing play. We can play with alphabet puzzle pieces. We can play with alphabet-shaped magnets because some kids really do get super interested in the letters and they want to move them around, or they might even know the sounds or want to make what sounds they make. But if their hands are holding them back, and if they only ever learn that reading and writing have to be progressing at the same rate as each other, and they're just not physically developed enough yet, then they might start getting really discouraged or feel like everything about reading and writing sucks because I can't make my hands do the thing that I want them to do. Whereas being able to move pieces around if they can pick up a puzzle piece and put it next to another one, then they can already do that. And then this is one based on one that I had seen very recently that was new to me, but a child who couldn't cross midline but had an M in his name, and so he would draw the middle line, just like I said with a cross, draw the middle line and then draw out from both sides, but he would draw a middle line and then draw a hump from both sides to be the M, and everybody was like, wow, that's a new thing, and I was like, yeah, this kid does not know how to cross midline yet. He's not, especially, and his adults felt like they were like, we make him tracing things, and then he traces them, and he does his best, and then as soon as he writes it, he just does it the wrong way, because he just isn't listening, and I'm like, isn't listening, he can't do it. He's not unmotivated, he's just literally not able to do it. And then on the flip side, then there will often be a few 3 to 5 year old kids who are interested in writing. Like, no adult has ever made them do it, they're just passionately interested in it themselves. They might even be good at it already. Kids can have very different skill sets depending on what they're interested in. And there's nothing wrong with, obviously, if a child knows how to write letters, great, like let them go for it, if it's what they want to do. There's also nothing that needs to be corrected in a child who's like, I'm writing, and they're actually just going like loop, 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 loop. Or if they're like, like I'm writing cursive, and they're like scribble, 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 scribble. Like, we don't need to be like, oh, well, you could just be like, oh, what does that say? You tell me about it, They might use writing or pretend writing in the other types of play that I have listed, like role play and socio-dramatic play. They might pretend to be a teacher, pretend to make a grocery list, pretend to write down an order at a restaurant. The other thing, a lot of times people won't, they'll recognize that they don't need to correct a child who's just doing like loops or scribbles, but if a child writes a letter backward or upside down or things like that, then they will feel like they need to step in and correct. And at the 3 to 5 age range, you really don't need to. It's okay for them to just kind of be experimenting with it. And there's like a whole thing with reversals. People get really concerned about their kids reversing letters. It really takes until 7 or 8 years old for some children. It's still within the normal range for it to take to within 7 and 8 years old to be able to tell that when a letter is facing a different way, it might become another letter. Because, if I turn this chair and make it face this way, it's still a chair. It didn't cease to be a chair or become something else. If I flip this chair upside down, you guys would be like, what are you doing? But it would still be a chair. But if I take a B and I flip it upside down, it becomes an entirely different letter for some reason, because we've made up these arbitrary rules of social, literacy. And, that doesn't mean that they aren't important or that we won't learn them eventually. But it sometimes takes children's brains a little while to put that together, that when it's facing this way, it's one thing. If it's facing this way, it's another thing. And the play and exploration is exactly what they're supposed to be doing to work on those skills. Even if that means writing it wrong, it doesn't mean that they're getting to practice writing it wrong and so they will forever. It means that that's what phase they're in right now. You can click to the next one for me. If children are not interested in writing and drawing, they might still be interested in other aspects of play that support the skills you will need to write and draw. There are lots and lots of things that require your body to be able to do 2 different things with your 2 hands at the same time. Some of these are really relevant to art and work in school. Some of them are just relevant to life. Like cutting a piece of paper while holding the paper with your other hand. That requires both your brain to be able to tell your 2 hands 2 different messages. Writing on paper while stabilizing the paper with your other hand. Zipping a jacket while holding the other side of the jacket with your hand. Climbing a ladder on a playground. Someday driving a car. Playing freely and playing lots of games that involve both hands strengthen this skill, bilateral coordination, that supports cutting and writing and stapling and gluing and painting and all kinds of things later on. Some things require alternating sides of your body, like playing hopscotch, riding a trike or a bike, dancing or playing musical instruments. Some things require coordinating both sides of your body to do the same thing at the same time, like doing jumping jacks or catching a ball. And all of these things are important for the strengthening both sides of your body skill. You can click to the next one. Oh, okay, I did not put in a slide, so I'll just talk. Children might also be interested in using glue, tape, Play-Doh, clay, a hole punch, paint, stickers, glitter, pom-poms, pipe cleaners, popsicle sticks, recyclables, any other random thing you can find or throw at them that they can use to explore and work on these foundational skills. So sometimes adults will get worried when children withdraw from tasks that are literally pencil and paper or markers and paper, or they're not interested in coloring sheets or things like that. But there's like a million other cool, creative, artsy ways. If they're not interested in writing or drawing with pencils or markers, they might be interested in using a Q-tip to paint. That's the same skill building. You have to pinch it with your fingertips and manipulate it to make marks on a paper. Or if they're not interested in coloring on a coloring sheet, they might be interested in coloring on the walls, which you can maybe redirect to an easel, or with chalk on the walls outside, or on a whiteboard or smartboard, because writing on a vertical surface instead of a horizontal surface strengthens your shoulders and elbows more, because you can't rest your arm while you're doing it. And so if children inherently know that they couldn't put words to it, but they inherently know that their body is developing inside out from the core outside, they might know that their shoulders and their elbows need more work before they're able to get into the fine motor things with their fingertips. And so they might be more interested in something where they're drawing like this on a vertical surface than where they can rest their arm, not get that development, and work on drawing on a horizontal surface. Or you can color and paint on 3D surfaces, like painting with washable paint or drawing with chalk on plastic cars. That does the same thing with upper arm strengthening. And then all of the things I mentioned earlier, like crossing midline, drawing on the diagonal, starting and stopping abruptly, those are skills that happen in the small muscles for fine motor activities like writing, but they also happen in the big muscles, like moving your whole arm or your whole body. So drawing with chalk on the ground, or butcher paper on the ground, or coloring something huge on the ground, or doing dances where you're like moving across your own midline, doing like Simon Says things, doing red light, green light, where you're stopping and starting abruptly. Those things don't seem like they have anything to do with writing, but the big skills of starting and stopping abruptly, crossing across my own body's diagonal or my own body's midline, those things affect the writing skills later on. Then, okay, this is my last section. There's another skill that's developing at the same time alongside all of these motor and movement skills. It happens in parallel to all of those other things, and that is sensory processing. Sensory is almost a little bit of a buzzword these days, but it originally comes from the field of occupational therapy. When we talk about sensory processing, we're talking about the different senses that are in your body. You probably learned about these when you were a child. Your sense of touch, hearing, sight, smell, taste. There are more senses than that too. There are actually quite a few more, but in occupational therapy and child development, we typically talk about our vestibular sense, which is our inner ear sense of balance and motion. Lets us know when we're in movement or when we're spinning. We tend to talk about our proprioceptive sense, our deep body sense of pressure and our sense of our body in space. And our interoceptive sense, which is our internal body sense of interpreting physical sensations like hunger or emotions like anxiety. People, not just kids, but all people. Can you click to the next one for me? People tend to have some forms of sensory input that they have a low tolerance for, and some forms of sensory input that they have a high tolerance for. Or I sometimes call them big cup, little cup. Some people have a low tolerance across the board for everything, sight, sound, smell, taste. Some people have a high tolerance across the board for everything, and those are like my thrill seeker people. But most people tend to have a mix of preferences. And if you think of them as big cup, little cup, if the cup overflows, the person does not feel good. They might have, it feels like overwhelm, and with children, they might melt down. But if the cup is too empty, that also doesn't feel good. Kids are often seeking to fill their cups at least part of the way every day. So a child who's drawing on themselves might be seeking to fill up their big cup for tactile touch sense. They might be really interested in the way that it feels, that it's like a little bit sticky on their hands, and they're super interested in that. A child who's like overwhelmed by the amount of noise or like seeking out the quietest area of the classroom or covering their ears might have a little cup, a low tolerance for auditory input, and it might be overwhelming them very fast. They might also not know how to like cover their ears or do something to self-advocate. They might just be freaking out and you don't know why, but it could be like because there's noise, and that's where occupational therapists can help. I don't expect everybody to like know how to interpret that by themselves, but this just gives you an idea of what kind of thing it is that I'm looking for when I come in to look at something like that. So if kids are doing something a lot, they probably have a big cup for that particular sense. A kid who is touching everything around the room probably has a big cup for the sense of touch. A kid who flinches when others touch him or get too close to him, or like starts a fight with somebody who brushed up against him, might have a little cup for the sense of touch, and so it felt like overwhelm and threat as soon as they got too much. You can click to the next one. Most children, especially under the age of 5, have a big cup for their proprioceptive sense. That's the one that I said is your sense of deep pressure, your feeling of where your body is in space. Children tend to be a little bit clumsy. Part of that is their motor coordination. They're still learning to make a motor plan about things. They're still developing those muscles. But part of that is also their sense of where they are in space compared to other things. Children often like deep pressure from squeezes or hugs. That's proprioceptive sense. That's what deep pressure is. Children will often squeeze themselves into small, tight spaces. Children often like jumping around on a trampoline or a couch or gym mats. These things are all their proprioceptive sense. It helps their body make sense of its surroundings and get a sense of groundedness. It's a very calming sense in that regard. That's one of the reasons why getting a big hug from someone you love can be very settling and calming to your body. There's obviously an emotional component to that, but there's also a very physical and sensory component to that. When I work with kids who are struggling with their sensory processing, they might be becoming overwhelmed by the things around them, or they might be seeking to fill up their cup so much that they're bothering other people with the ways in which they're trying to do it. When I work with those kids, the first things I usually do are all proprioceptive things. So I put some examples of them, and we might be able to put these slides like printed out or something somewhere so I don't have to go through each thing. But the quickest thing I can ask myself in my mind is, what's something we can lift, push, or carry? Because those are all to the proprioceptive deep body sense, and they're all things that can be done in a classroom or a daycare setting. Pushing and pulling, jumping, wiggling, squishing with a beanbag or pillow, giving them a hug if it's appropriate and if it's okay in the environment that you're in. These things all give that grounded, calming sense to children, to most children. Obviously, if they're like hating it, then don't like force hug them. But and then click to the next one for me. It's the same with vestibular sense, with your inner ear sense of movement, but this one can become overwhelming to kids a lot faster. So this is one that I really, really do at their own pace. But if you have access to somewhere to balance, wobble, or spin, and let children be able to like choose that or seek to that as part of like the classroom environment, then that's also often a really good way of giving that sense of calm and groundedness to them. Proprioceptive and vestibular input are hugely important for self-regulation and brain development. Children in that 3 to 5 age range, and even on up to the 3 to 7 age range, will often not be able to sit still for more than like 3 to 5 minutes, and that's because of their brain developing these senses. They're not supposed to sit still. They're supposed to move, wiggle, fidget, climb, roll, crawl, balance, jump, spin, run, go upside down. These things are influencing their core strength, their joint stability, their sensory processing, and each of these things will support their school skills later in life, and these are the years for them to do that. That's why we need to protect opportunities for our kids to be able to develop all of these skills through play. They will be the supports that make it possible for them to learn to write, read, use scissors to cut out shapes, and be a good friend, take turns, walk in line in the hallway, and interact with all kinds of people. These are the supports that make it possible to live the whole rest of their lives. And they only have a few years where this is the exclusive thing that their brain can focus on. You guys working with the youngest ages have that opportunity. That's it.